Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stanford Emergency Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Matthew Strelo, Executive Vice Chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Stanford. Every year, the Stanford Emergency Medicine Innovation Symposium, also known as StEMI X, brings together leaders and innovators from healthcare, education, and industry to explore what's possible in the future of acute care. In this episode, Conference Director Dr. Ryan Ribeira joins us to reflect on the themes, breakthroughs, and energizing ideas that stood out at this year's symposium. Dr. Ribeira is an emergency physician and healthcare innovator whose work spans clinical operations, digital health, and system-level redesign. In addition to his leadership at StEMI X, he is also the medical director for the Adult Emergency Department here at Stanford and founder of the Stanford Emergency Medicine Partnership Program. Dr. Ribeira, Ryan, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining me for this conversation. First question, I know you have a million responsibilities. I listed 3 out of 3,000. Always amazing to see how much you pack into your days. Is today more tech-driven or more caffeine-driven?
It's always a little bit of both, right? Fueled by the Red Bull, the cultural drink of emergency medicine, and then enthusiasm for the future of acute care. That's part of what keeps me running.
So Ryan, this was the 5th year of StEMI X, but your path into innovation and technology started long before this conference existed, even before I met you. Can you take us back a bit? Where did this interest and passion for innovation and technology begin?
I think some of it goes back, all the way to undergrad, actually. I was a computer science major at first when I started undergrad, then switched into accounting and then switched into business management entrepreneurship. So I was kind of already on the emergency medicine route there with my varied and always changing interests. But I was most of the way through that before I even realized I wanted to go to med school. So even by the time I decided to go to med school, I was already very kind of technology and entrepreneurship oriented. And so while I was doing all my prereqs for med school, I was working for an angel investor, consulting on the companies that he invested in kind of early stage technologies. And so by the time I went to med school, I knew this was something that I was going to be interested in. I was part of a bunch of different health tech startups in med school. Almost all of them collapsed, but that's okay. That's the nature of it. And then in my 4th year of med school, started SimX, virtual reality medical training company that I founded that has now grown into kind of an industry leading company in that field. And then, along the way, I did pit stops in the American Medical Association. I was on their board at the time that we founded the AMA's venture fund. I wrote the digital health playbook, which was a great experience. And then did a pit stop at Google along the way too, as a program manager for health search. So kind of the medical input for all of everything having to do with searching for diagnoses and symptoms. So I was the Dr. Google for a bit, which maybe I shouldn't say out loud. I don't know. It's a hard job. It's harder than it seems. We did our best. But yeah, I don't know if there's any one kind of particular early experience, but I think throughout all of those, something that I noticed was just how starved for clinical input a lot of these technology companies are. They've got great ideas. They've got phenomenal engineers. They've got, business leaders who really know the space, but they don't really understand how the clinical side works. And then on the flip side of that, as I went through my academic training, I saw we've got so many talented researchers and clinicians who really know how healthcare works, don't really know always how to take the innovations that they're finding in the lab and turn them into products. And so as I started my career as a faculty member here, it just seemed so clear that part of what I should try to do is bridge that gap, find a way to get the best of what we do in academia and get that out in front of industry and vice versa, so we can work together to build a future.
What drives you then to want to fill that gap? Why is, with all the things you've done, you've obviously been working at this from birth to bedside. What drives you to do that work as your focus area with all the energy and effort you're putting into it?
Well, so I'll say, I think when we look at the big problems we faced in healthcare, right, the fact that just a huge proportion of our GDP is taken up in healthcare expenses, that so many people find it unaffordable. I've done a lot of work in policy space. I think healthcare policy is really important, but that kind of stuff to me is not all that likely to make healthcare like 80% more affordable and accessible. That's the kind of stuff we need, right? I think that's really the level of change we need. The kind of solutions that tend to have that big of an effect are technology solutions. And so I do think if we're going to make healthcare something that is easily accessible and affordable to everyone under all circumstances, it's going to need to be through a technology change. And I do think we're at a time when there are a lot of candidates for technologies that could have that level of change. But if that technology is not used correctly, not implemented correctly, then, we risk some of the problems we faced in EMR, where I think very often it works against us as much as it works for us. And so I think there's a huge opportunity here with the advent of AI and telemedicine and some of the other things that I'm sure we'll delve into today to have a huge impact on affordability and accessibility, but it needs to be informed by the bedside perspective. It needs to be informed by clinicians, and it needs to be informed by academia who's committed to building a future that is patient-centered and not exclusively from the perspective of profits and building more money for shareholders, right? That I think it's very urgent that we bridge this gap. We need that bedside perspective in what's happening now in industry.
It's interesting the way you came about that perspective around affordability and access. I came through a lot of global health and thinking about global issues. And one of the things that really drove me was, hey, we have all of this care available, all of this expertise, all these medicines and things. We just can't get them to the people that are in the most dire straits across the world. And I don't think we should be putting all this energy into innovation and tech, was the way I was thinking many decades ago. And as I worked in that space longer and longer, I started to come to where you're at, which is the only way to really bridge that gap, when the Bill Gates way of thinking about it, is by innovation and technology. Is the only way you're going to actually get to access and affordability. And you're going to have to leapfrog. You're not going to be able to grind one step at a time in just disseminating what we currently do.
Yeah.
So that's a great way of looking at it. I'm surprised that you and I ended up in a similar perspective there. I don't think we've had this conversation before. So that's great to hear. Turning to StEMI X, this is really this conference that talks about healthcare technology, and technology within healthcare space is probably evolving either at an exponential pace or as fast as any technology area and focus.
Yeah.
So each year it's a little bit different in the symposium itself. What was your vision this year as you were putting the conference together?
Yeah, well, like you say, the technology is advancing very quickly. And so I think our hope was that StEMI X can be like your one-stop shop for getting up to speed on the current state of emerging technologies within acute care. And not just up to speed, but ahead of the game, I guess, right? So what are people doing right now? What can you be ready for in the next 1 to 2 years? I mean, that's about as far as you can realistically look out right now and be able to predict anything. And so that I think was a big part of it. Is like, let's make this relatively all encompassing. But, I think also we wanted it to be a real meeting of the minds. I think to the points we were talking about earlier, the importance of bringing together industry and academia and community all together and have them bounce ideas off of each other, build ideas off of each other, and be able to do that in a forum surrounded by, people who are really on the front lines. I think that was the vision. And that's why our design was pretty panel heavy, right? Because I think that helped accomplish the idea of bringing together diverse viewpoints and letting them hash it out. And I think that was accomplished very well in a lot of these panels. And then thematically, I think it's probably obvious to all of us that we need to start thinking about emergency care beyond just the walls of the emergency department, right? The old maxim of care anytime, any place, anywhere. It's more the right care in the right time in the right place, and getting someone all of those rights starts at least as soon as they are considering emergency care. And so the pre-ED patient journey, and then also the post-ED patient journey, making sure that those are covered. And so that's why our theme was EM without walls, innovating across the acute care continuum, that continuous starting and encompassing all of that space. And I think that's really important too, because those, if we in emergency medicine don't own that, nobody's going to own that. And I think we all know that there's a lot of important work that can be done there to make sure that patients are being directed appropriately, getting the follow-up they need. And that's important work from a health system level to make sure we're using our resources appropriately, and also from a patient level to make sure that they get the care that they need. So that was kind of what inspired our theme and our structure.
I thought one of the words of 2025 that I didn't see on any list was journey. Every time I go to something, I have a patient's journey, my journey, this journey. Everybody's on a journey, even if it's just to go get a cup of coffee. So it was interesting that you're talking about the patient's journey instead of like once they hit the emergency department or once they engage with the health system, but instead when they start to think like, do I need care? Right.
Yeah.
Back to your Dr. Google. First step is to get onto Google or now some AI platform and ask that question. And you're talking about this whole continuum of acute care and thinking. And when I was involved or watching some of those StEMI X panels, what I noticed is you were bringing people from all over. A lot of people talk about bringing, I brought a few leaders from this and that, but like you had chief scientific officer from Microsoft, leader at Amwell, right? Delivery versus tech versus academia. And you really meshed them all together into the same conversations. And I just thought some of that friction and that was created in conversation that was created was really remarkable. Was there anything that really stood out to you as areas that are future exploration areas or real points of friction? Like what was remarkable to you in those conversations?
Yeah, well, definitely a lot of opportunities where there was friction. And I think one, for example, that stood up to me, and some of this was the panel that I happened to lead, which was on preventing unnecessary ED visits. And there was a lot of talk there about the ways that we can use things like remote patient monitoring in helping to shape the journey towards acute care, which is not something I had necessarily thought of. I think remote patient monitoring, that's a tool for hospital at home people. That's, a tool for endocrinologists to monitor diabetes patients or things like that. But talking about how not only can we perhaps intervene once someone decides to seek acute care, but, through remote patient monitoring technologies that are becoming more ubiquitous, maybe you can even intervene before they realize that they're about to seek acute care. So we had a panelist, for example, who ran a company that used cell phone based technologies to analyze people's conversations to look for signs that their mental health was going off the rails and that they might have a break at some point, and being able to nudge and intervene before that happens, before they need acute care. I thought that was really fascinating. That came up in a few different panels. And then, an area of friction, I guess, both for that and for wearables. Wearables was a topic that came up in a number of instances, and realizing that there's a lot of untapped opportunity to bring some of this wearable and this home RPM data into the acute care visit and being able to incorporate that data into our decision making. But we don't really have like a data structure for that. We don't really have a way to get that into the medical record so you can document that this data existed. We don't really have ways for the bedside doc to know always that this is reliable data or this isn't, or this device is approved in this way and this one is not. And so I think that was a point of friction that stood out too, is that, I think it is one of the many ways in which we need more cross collaboration to find ways that we can find common data structures for some of these devices that can be then integrated into our clinical informatics infrastructure so that we can start using some of this stuff at the bedside.
So the bridges you're building between healthcare technology or technology companies, academic institutions, healthcare delivery groups are all committed to integrating that technology in a way that will help the patient. Is that possible in the setting where we're struggling to identify reimbursement models for those things? Can we advance those maybe at a slower pace, but still make advancements on a consistent basis? Or are we just really held to when payers and reimbursement models will cover those?
Yeah. I think it's not entirely black or white, but I think what you're pointing to is something that's really important, which is that I think we need innovation in business models and reimbursement as much as we need innovation and technology. And if you look at something like telehealth, for example, like that telehealth has exploded since the pandemic and is, now a part of, I think, 1 in every 5 outpatient encounters is via telehealth or something. And the technology to do that has existed since like the 90s at least, right? It's not a challenging technology to have just a video link between two people or to put that on a website so people can connect. It was really the business model and the reimbursement. And I think you saw a bit of a bimodal interest in the early 2000s. People were all talking about how telemedicine was going to be the future. And it died down a little bit, I think, because the business model didn't keep up. And then the business model was figured out and it all reemerged and exploded. And so, I think there's a risk here. There's a lot of exciting technologies in AI and remote patient monitoring that I think there's a burst of enthusiasm as the technology is being figured out. And if we don't figure out the business model and reimbursement, then there is a risk that stuff gets sidelined until somebody does. And that's, I think something that probably doesn't get enough attention. And this is, I'll going to keep hammering on this. This is part of why we need that cross communication, because this is one of the hardest things for industry to figure out. How do you sell this into healthcare? Like, who's the purchaser for this? And what's the business model that's going to work, that's going to make an ED or, an outpatient clinic want to buy this? That's exactly the kind of stuff that they don't know unless we help them.
Okay. I think, it goes all the way from the very advanced to even the simple things. Like last night, taking care of a patient who came in with a syncopal episode. They happened to have an Apple Watch. I scrolled through it. I scrolled through the ECG. I scrolled through their heart rate during that time. I scrolled through their saturation during that time, looked at all of that. Took time, but definitely changed my decision-making, actually.
Yeah.
And there's no reimbursement model for that. Yet, if I just get a rhythm strip and print it, we'll get reimbursed for it. So like that lag time, is really slowing us down. I think during the pandemic, one of the remarkable things was how fast telehealth, telemedicine, digital health, whatever you want to call it, exploded. It was like, give us any path and we will blow that door open and find ways, because the consumers, the patients, the people that need the care want it. And I think there's a lot of people ready to deliver on that innovation when it's financially feasible.
Yeah. Sometimes it was the acute disasters, people move quickly. The kind of slow motion disasters, which is what we're experiencing in large part in healthcare. It's harder to motivate people around, but that's kind of our job, to draw attention to what needs that attention.
Draw on both your experience from StEMI X, all the other experience you mentioned, your role as medical director, and also your leadership at the Stanford Emergency Medicine Partnership Program, which is this group that I know you founded that brings together industry and academia to help industry get those voices from academic physicians and clinicians. Where do you think academic industry partnerships are heading? And are they real collaborations or partnerships? Or are we just a means to an end for these, in general, for-profit companies?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And maybe I'll answer the second one first, which is we may be a means to an end, but I think it's still valuable. It's still an important step. And it's I think drives us towards a better end if we're inserted there along the way. And where are they headed? So I'll give you a bit of a mixed answer. Generally, I'm a technology optimist, but I think it's important to raise the red flag when it needs to be raised. And I will say, I am a bit worried that I think industry academic partnerships are dissipating a bit. I think that historically there is a much more obvious need for academia. I think industry did not have the means of conducting their own research really at all. They had no research infrastructure at all. And I think with the rise of kind of some of these mega technology companies, that is a bit different. They have their own very robust R&D arms. They have their own very robust research arms. It used to be that if you want to see the cutting edge of any technology, you go to a leading research university, and that is not always the case now. Sometimes the cutting edge stuff and the academic publications are coming out of industry. And that's, on the one hand, it's great that industry is applying scientific rigor to the things that they are doing, but it does risk, I think, decoupling that what has historically been a very important partnership. Because as you pointed out, there's just different fundamental motivations. Like academia is about exploring the future of human knowledge for that's own end, for building more knowledge and understanding the universe around us, and generally doing it with an eye towards improving the world and improving the people in it. And business just isn't necessarily that way. And I say that as someone very involved in industry. It is at its core very often motivated by generating more revenue, more wealth for those who could own those resources. And that's can be used in positive ways, but it is just a different dynamic. And so I do think there's a risk. And I don't want to say that I see it drifting further apart, but I do think if academia doesn't show their value, there is risk of it drifting apart. And so I get worried when I hear about academic centers that are very concerned about data sharing agreements or are very intense about not wanting to allow industry to profit in any way off of their data. Like, I understand the motivation behind that kind of thing, but I worry a bit that we get iced out by that, and that if we don't show value and that if we're not willing to play ball, that we might find ourselves in a position where we don't have a lot of influence on the future of health technology.
Well, I appreciate you taking a critical eye to your techno-optimism, but I would say one thing that I have noticed with the technology companies producing more clinically relevant research, data, and things like that is that it's almost like like a corollary is kind of like you do something in a lab in a mouse, but that doesn't mean it's going to work in a human. And that doesn't mean it's going to work in a human with X condition and all of the other things that go into the complexity of a human individual. And I see a lot of that when I look at a lot of what's coming out of the technology companies and industry, which is stuff that looks good on paper and has promise, but has not been released into the wild and then proven to be both clinically and cost effective, right? Yeah. And I think that if we don't engage, there is the possibility that those companies can convince the regulators, the other folks that are the decision makers, that what they're producing is good for the wild, is good for the individual, is good for the health system, without real evidence of those final deliveries, right? Those clinically important patient-oriented outcomes. So I think we're still very necessary, as I think you do as well. But I do agree that we need to be actively engaging and making that message felt and heard.
Yeah. I mean, it's the in vitro versus in vivo, right? Like things in vitro, we are the owners of the in vivo in this case, right? Like we control access to the patient population, and that is really important. But I agree with you, the risk that not everybody recognizes how important that is and how disastrously wrong something can do when it can go when it's released into the wild if it hasn't been properly vetted. So I do think that's an area where we do provide a lot of value, being able to help take things that they've developed in theory and make sure that it works in practice.
Well, StEMI X had a lot of conversations around different solutions, different technologies that were coming down the pipeline. And it's a lot for people to take in. Even myself, who's regularly engaging with people like yourself, what's one idea or one technology that like every emergency department, every emergency physician or acute care clinician should be paying attention to now, or at least getting prepared for, because it's coming their way, one way or another?
I'd say it's the easy answer, but it's the right answer. So I'm going to say it anyway, which is AI, right?
Yeah. You said AI.
I did. I said AI.
I thought we were going to go through the whole podcast and not say AI.
Well, it's easy for, I think, people to be cynical if you've kind of lived through the era of, big data is going to change everything. And that kind of came and went and it had an impact, but not transformational. I think the broad consensus across a lot of these sessions was that, yeah, you're going to see some fluffy use cases out there for AI that don't make a lot of sense, but actually A lot of it is real and is progressing very quickly, and it really will have a transformational impact. And not all of that is going to be visible, I don't think, to the end user. I think, many of us are familiar now with tools like DAX that will record what you're talking about with the patient and generate a note, and that's great. But like one of the biggest impacts of LLM technology specifically is its ability to take unstructured data from the EMR and turn it into structured data. That was always back when I was doing AI health technology companies in the early 2000s. That was always a limitation. You can't really build algorithms on unstructured data, but that has all changed with the fact that you can just let an LLM scan a medical record and return structured data to you. And that's useful at the bedside, for a doc who's trying to get a quick read on what's a patient's medical history, but it's also useful for those who are then developing new algorithms on top of that. So it allows us to create predictive algorithms on a lot of things that would have been impossible even 2 years ago. Things like being able to predict, if a patient is going to need palliative consult in the ED, someone's going to be dissatisfied with their care, or being able to advise on where you should room a patient based on everything in their medical record and everything that's happening in your ED in this moment. Those types of algorithms, I think, can be developed relatively easily now because of this. So it really, I think LLM technology specifically is quite transformational in that and many other ways. And so it is coming. And I do think that EDs who develop facility with navigating these technologies early on are going to be much better off in their ability to care for patients once this is universal.
Okay. Well, I do think that is probably the answer, even if we're trying to look for, alternatives. I don't view AI in healthcare as coming out of nowhere. I think it's interesting that I do hear that occasionally, like it's this all of a sudden thing. But you mentioned big data, you mentioned the electronic health record. None of those, AI wouldn't be possible at all without those steps, right? And so this is something that's been going on for decades, that we're just seeing this moment where now there's enough, quote unquote, compute, right? Potentially an investment to make those things come together. And I think that it's really, there's a tremendous opportunity in it as well as risk, but I think the opportunity actually outweighs the risk if it's done thoughtfully.
I agree 100%. I mean, going back to the very beginning, like why is it so crucial that we, are building these bridges and helping to develop these technologies? Because I do think things like AI is probably the best candidate we have right now for something that has the potential to make healthcare 80% cheaper and just dramatically more accessible and help all of us be dramatically more efficient at delivering care. But like you say, you got to do it right.
Well, I'd like to end on a lighter note. You're known throughout our organization, I'm guessing nationally as well, as one of the most entertaining presenters. And we have 100 people in our faculty, and I do know that you are currently number one as being entertaining. So you got to share at least what's one piece of your secret sauce for being entertaining, such that everybody, no matter how many faculty meetings we're at, always want to hear your like spiel.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. What's the secret sauce in that? I will say, I've always felt.
You don't have to give away all your secrets.
Oh, of course. That goes with said. I would never give away all my secrets. Got to keep something for myself. But I would say I have always found that one of the most important things about presenting is telling a story, right? Is thinking about the journey that you're leading the listener on from beginning to end, and making sure it connects, and making sure that, like, when things are getting a little dark, you add a little light. And when things are getting a little bit, too fluffy, you dial it back and hit them with some real data. And I feel like that's probably something that I find can help any presentation, whether you're reporting out on, the monthly numbers for the ED, or you're giving some kind of grandiose thing about the future of AI and acute care. Is like that step of saying, well, like, how are people feeling on this slide? And then how are they going to feel on this slide? And what is the journey, the arc that I'm taking them on? And so that's what I try to do. I don't always hit the mark on that, but I think that's one of the things I focused on.
All right. I have given a lot of lectures and spoken to a lot of people that are considered experts in lecturing and speaking. And I'm not sure anyone's ever said to me, like, how does your audience feel on each slide? Well, that's the secret sauce I want everyone to take home with them today. So that's a wrap for today's episode. Huge thanks to Dr. Ribeira for sharing his insights and ideas, for his leadership and innovation in technology and StEMI X. For those listening, be sure to check out the show notes for links to his work. We are also thrilled to share that this year's StEMI X session recordings are available for viewing and CME on the ACEP Anytime Learning platform. Many thanks to our friends at ACEP for collaborating with us to share these conversations. If you like today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with a colleague. And as always, we want to hear from you. Send us your questions, ideas, or feedback at the link in the description. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep taking care of anyone, anything, at any time. If you like today's episode, don't forget to I can't say that word. Hold on. I'm going to need water.